All right, everyone. Welcome to our 76th salon of the Maternal Gift Economy Breaking Through series. The topic today is Rematriating Society. For some of you may have been with us last season, and we had part one. So it was so successful that we're back again to do part two with Sherri Mitchell, Pat McCabe, and Vicki Noble, hosted by Genevieve Vaughan and the International Feminists for a Gift Economy. We know there are lots of options, especially today. We are delighted that you've chosen to spend your time with us. I'm Letecia Larson, your moderator. I'm going to give some short introductions so that we can just get into the heart of our talks today. Our first speaker will be Vicki Noble. She's a feminist, artist, writer, healer, and wisdom teacher, author of 8 books, including Shakti Woman, Feeling Our Fire, Healing Our World, and The Double Goddess. She is the co-creator of the very well-known Mother Peace Tarot. More importantly, she's been a good friend for many, many years, and with Genevieve, Vicki, and we are some of the elders who are overseeing or advisory to the Sekhmet Temple outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. We're so happy to have Vicki with us. Our second speaker is Pat McCabe, an artist, activist, and grandmother. Pat McCabe is a bridge between Indigenous wisdom and the modern world. Her openness of heart and clarity of vision have touched people all across the globe. Through her speaking, writings, art, and ceremony, Pat reframes questions about sustainability, balance, power, and gender. Pat devotes her work to supporting the next generations in being functional members of the hoop of life and upholding the honor of being human. Our third speaker is Sherri Mitchell. She's an Indigenous attorney, activist, and author from the Penobscot Nation. She's an author of Sacred Instructions, an internationally renowned book of Indigenous wisdom for living a spiritual-based change, which has been published in 4 languages. She's also contributed to dozens of anthologies, including the bestseller, All We Can Save, Truth, Courage, and the Solution for the Climate, along with Resetting Our Future, Empowering Climate Action in the United States, and My Life Growing Up in Native America. Sherri is a director of the Land Peace Foundation, an Indigenous educational organization that focuses on Indigenous leadership, environmental justice, land rematriation, and kinship building. There are many, many more accolades for each of these women and their good work. So I want to invite you to please take a look at their full bios on our website, maternalgifteconomymovement.org. So without further ado, I'd like to just turn the mic over to Vicki, and then she's going to hand it off to Pat, and Pat will hand it off to Sherri, so we can have the optimum amount of time listening to these wonderful, wise women celebrating International Women's Day. So Vicki, welcome.
Thank you. So nice to be here again with all of you. I thought I would share a PowerPoint this morning. I think images are so powerful and helpful. And I've been working on, my own sort of Western version of rematriation for decades. And one of the ways that I like to do it is to look as far back as possible, which in the beginning of my work took me back to old Europe and the work of Maria Gimbutas. And that was a really good start. Native people had said in the 1970s, go back to your roots. And I thought we have to go back very, very far to find our matriarchal beginnings and our matriarchal structures and values. But old Europe was almost like the end of a long evolution of matriarchal values and organizational structures. And over the years, I began to understand that and push my work farther and farther back. So I'd like to first get this PowerPoint up and share with you my theory that the female biological cycles, the menstrual cycle, the synchronization with the moon, that these are some of the most important key evolutionary factors that made us human 200,000 years ago or whenever that happened. So I can't believe it actually worked. This is the first time it ever worked right from the get-go. So this is, and even this information that used to be brand new when I made this PowerPoint is probably already outdated because paleontologists and archaeologists are constantly moving the dates back. You know, when I first went to college in the 1960s, we were told that that Homo sapiens sapien developed in Europe, of course, and that all the art and the Paleolithic finds in Europe were the beginning of human consciousness, you know, at its peak of development. Well, none of that is true. And they've pushed it back decade after decade after decade until it's really obvious that it was at least 200,000 years ago in Africa, and probably, you know, a lot longer than that. And this is just one example of a cave that they found way south in South Africa, where they have evidence of early modern humans. Modern meaning just like us, and that we certainly haven't come any further. And I wonder if it's evolutionary at all at this point. But my big interest is that matriarchy as a human, natural, organic, structural development is from the beginning, and patriarchy is 5 minutes ago. It's like an eye blink in the overall picture. And I just think that we have to understand that and not listen to all the academics who tell us over and over again that we've always been like this, that it's always been patriarchy and blah, blah, blah. So, so that's what I'm here to prove. I love to look at the bonobos. They sometimes even think that the bonobos could be our ancestor. I think it's good enough that we share so much DNA with the bonobos and the chimps that we're just like siblings. You know, it's less than 1% difference in our DNA. But the differences are very interesting because the chimps are male dominant and violent quite often, quite a lot of the time. And the bonobos are matriarchal. They're female dominant, if you can say that, female centered, and they're peaceful, and they're extremely sexual, and they solve a lot of their potential conflicts with sex, whereas chimps tend to settle their dominance issues through dominant sex, through rape. I'm sort of playing with this here. This is a bonobo female. One of the things about bonobos is that their genitalia, female genitalia, is in the front like ours. So we are closer to the bonobos than we are to the chimps. And so here I'm playing with this chimpanzee, this bonobo female who's so explicitly appreciating her female biology. And then this Indian temple with the Lajagauri doing the same thing, showing us the same thing. And then this, I think the left vulvas are from Bolivia, I believe, and the right one is a horseshoe vulva from somewhere in Europe. Vulvas are the earliest and most pervasive images all over the world and through all time. And, you know, so we've come to understand that usually where they show up has to do with female initiation rites, you might say, or biological celebrations of life phases. So this is just some scholarship about humans and bipedalism and so on. But I'm very interested in the menstrual cycle and the fact that we developed a unique bipolar menstrual cycle synchronized with the moon. I think this is very unregarded by science in a way that doesn't make sense. It seems to me to be the seed of difference. It's certainly as important in our human evolution as tool making or language. And so I have come to believe as a, you know, as a ritualist and a healer, I've done a lot of ritual over the years, and I think that the menstrual cycle was the structure for the whole group, males, females, children, everybody, to keep time and to celebrate life. So here again, the differences are we gave up estrus. The other mammals who are close to us, the other primates, they all have estrus. They go into heat. Now, the bonobos, I read recently that some of the scholars think that the bonobos are actually evolving to have a menstrual cycle, maybe someday like ours. If they live that long, they're in the Congo, you know, and it's pretty rough down there. But it's our human bipolar cycle that makes us so unique. And this is a calendar bone. I don't know if you are familiar with some of the Paleolithic findings in Europe. This is a calendar bone from a cave in Europe, and it was Marshak, can't remember his first name, wonderful paleontologist. He did microscopic research that showed that these markings on these bones that before the academics had said were just scratches, you know, they were just random markings. And Marshak showed that they were very conscientiously done day after day after day, that they were keeping track of what he called the female menstrual cycle, which I thought was incredibly enlightened of him. And so these are some of the images from the Paleolithic period. Marshak talked about what he called the storied tradition. It's a way of talking about an oral tradition, but it's the way that he perceived it, particularly through all of the finds in Europe. And he said that storied tradition, with all of its different iconographic and mythological elements, was organized around the figure of a matrix female, you know, who was like the original ancestress of all of us, or the original great mother, we would say, in women's spirituality. So the one on the left is the Venus of La Selle. She's was sculpted on a rock overhang where you enter a cave. You kind of bow to her as you go into the cave. She's holding a crescent horn with 13 notches on it. This is from 30,000 years ago, you know. So the idea that they didn't understand reproduction is so silly. She's telling us, you know, it's like a whole reproductive lesson. 13 notches. So on the 13th day of your cycle, you're fertile. You're coming into your fertile period. The 13 lunar months that patriarchy replaced with the 12 months, and they had to, you know, dither with the calendar a little bit to get that to happen. So we still have 13 lunar months. I'm fascinated by some of these calendar bones, like the one at the bottom here. It shows a mare, a pregnant mare, and it then tallies an 11-month lunar cycle, and that's how long it takes a mare to foal. So, they were working in almost scientific ways with nature. The picture on the right is Monica Shu, of course, her God-giving birth, that she was declared not only it was declared not only obscene in the late 1960s, but also blasphemous. It's an African-faced woman giving birth, God giving birth. A little more of the Paleolithic. Neanderthals and modern humans, they know now that we coexisted, and even that there was some intermixing, some of us getting our DNA. I haven't done this, but my daughters have. When you get your DNA stuff done, there's a little bit of Neanderthal in some of us, which is fascinating. So vulva signs, lunar menstrual calendars, it's rich artistic leavings for us in the caves. But then it's also really important to know, as I would have suspected, that just like the European calendars that we have evidence of because they're on bone and it doesn't disintegrate, they have found a baboon fibula with 29 incised notches in a cave in Africa, and they've compared it with similar calendar sticks of wood still used by they don't say Bushmen anymore. What's the word? Khoisan? And in Southwest Africa. So, we had calendars for as long as we've been conscious and kept track of time. And then what I'm also fascinated by is the incredible continuity. This is one of the things Gimbutas pointed out about old Europe, that the continuity of several thousand years of the same symbol system and the same organizational structure of a peaceful, long-term community, more than a community, a civilization. She called it the goddess civilization. This is Malta. This is the site of Menidra, the Menidra temple. And this is a picture that I took in the 90s before they put fences all around it. And so I was standing next to this this large stone. And the calendar notched on it looked like the calendar bones that I had been studying for decades. So that was thrilling. And now I've read that the scholars believe that that this particular stone with this calendar is more than just a lunar menstrual calendar, that it's actually in some way regarding Venus, the cycles of Venus, and other aspects of astronomy. So that's, these things are, the more they study them, the more complex we understand their thinking was, and their knowledge, and their ability to tune in to the cosmos and stay really earth-based and grounded in peace on earth, all at the same time. And I've always been fascinated by that. I've always thought that the idea of a high priestess and a coven, that it was really something like a woman who was able to channel the energies of the sky and the earth and all of what the stones are holding. And, it's like everything is a repository of the whole thing. And if we tune in with all of our faculties, we can experience the holidays, for example. I'll get to that in a minute. So I wanted to just share quickly my original epiphany about the mandalas. This is the site of Lipinski Vir. It's on the Danube. It's a transitional site, so very, very old. It was Mesolithic, sort of hunter-gatherer, fisher people. And then the farmers from, I don't know if you know this whole, they've proved this now with the DNA research, that the people from the old goddess civilizations in Turkey, basically Anatolia, the land of the mothers, they migrated to the south of Greece, to Crete, and onto the mainland of Greece, and then eventually migrated north and settled around the Danube, and then spread from there all the way to the Black Sea and up into Ukraine. So this site is probably, these things that we're looking at, these are structures. This is an archaeological picture of the original site. Triangular huts of some kind. They're never sure quite what, but each of the huts had a kind of a boulder goddess or a fish goddess, like this one we're looking at. But you see, she's like an early version of a Sheila Nagig. She's a display figure, as Miriam Robbins Dexter would call her. She's showing us her vulva, and that she's 7,000, 8,000 years old. So, you know, we're told that Sheila Nagigs are something from medieval British Isles, but it's the display figure is ancient and part of this heritage that has to do, I think, with the generative principle and what Gimbutas called birth, death, and regeneration. These powerful female biological cycles that gave rise to the idea of a goddess or a great mother or a female figure who holds that information. But it's like as above, so below, because I believe, and I know this is essentialist, I own being essentialist, if that's what people need to call it. I believe that women are charged in some way with housing this generative and regenerative energy that comes through the female cycles and the female biology. I'll say more about that. So the way that I've worked with that over the years is I a long time ago created this lunar template and started working with it. And over the years, I just keep adding to it because they keep, you know, I keep finding new information. You know, I forgot to say, I want to go back to the Lipinski Vir. The day that I was there, I was fortunate to be on a trip with Joan Marler and Miriam Robbins Dexter and lots of the archaeomythological scholars. And we were in Bulgaria. So here we're actually, I'm sorry, we're in Serbia. We're looking across the river, across the Danube to Romania from this shot on the left. And that day that we were there, we were out on the lawn and the archaeologists were showing us new finds that they had from the site. And an old man from the village came and brought this loaf of bread that you see down in the right-hand corner. Now, I had been doing Tibetan Dakini mandala practices for about a decade by then. And when I saw this loaf of bread, I couldn't believe it because it looked to me like a Tibetan mandala. And I had no idea that such a thing could be possible. What was it doing in old Europe, you know? And I think it had a longevity. He said it had to do with death rituals and that it had been baked that morning. And so I think this is part of what Gimbutas talked about when she said there was a 9,000-year continuity in Europe, as long as you looked at the underground stream or the substratum of women's culture. And that's where you find all of the old motifs from the oldest sites in Europe and beyond. So anyway, that got me going, and I started to really study the mandala, assuming that it could be everywhere in the world. I even took a group of women to Peru in 2006, and I told them I'd never been there myself, but we had a good guide, and I told them we'll do this Dakini ritual every morning so that we have some unified energy to start the day with and to share. And I don't know if there are any mandalas in Peru, but let's keep our eye out. So everywhere we went in Peru, there was a mandala. They called it, I'll go here now. It's very much like the one on the right here. They call it the Inca cross in Peru. In Argentina, they actually give it a goddess name, Chacana. But this is a fire pit from Nepal, from a temple in Kathmandu, and it's on the floor of the courtyard of the temple. They told us it was in honor of the goddess Ajima. Ajima is the grandmother goddess that predates Tibetan Buddhism. So she's the pre-Buddhist great mother of Tibet. And everywhere I go now, I look for mandala. And finally, last year, I don't even have a picture of this in this particular PowerPoint, but last year, or recently, I learned that Koranovo, the big tell in Bulgaria, it's like 50 feet high, that the archaeologists have dug the strata from all the thousands of years that it was in existence. It's a site near the Black Sea. And Koranovo culture has come to be understood as one of the most highly evolved old European goddess civilizations. And finally, I found some information a few years ago that Koranovo was built in mandala shape. So all the sites at Koranovo in that 50 feet of archaeological strata, it's mandala over and over and over. So what I've come to understand is that there's some way that all cultures all over the world who aren't Western and patriarchal have used the mandala, the 4 cardinal points and the points in between, the 8-point calendar, the 8-point cycle, the eternal return, as the pagans call it. And then that's what put me on my study of going as far back as I could to the origins of being human. And the fact that I think that we brought the mandala out of Africa. It went everywhere in the world. It's our indigenous, our universal indigenous structure. And so I just feel like the fact that we left off of understanding that we're part and parcel of this cyclic reality that's being understood and has been understood our entire evolutionary cycle, that it's all over the world, and it's only Western patriarchal culture, and only quite recently, who left off from these understandings of cyclic reality and moved into this linear thing of growth, 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 progress at all costs, and so on, which is destroying our environment. And maybe our species, could be the end of the story for us if we aren't able to shift. And so for years and years and years now, I've been just adding to this, it's a Tibetan mandala that you see in the background in this calendar, but it's really the moon cycles. Here's the new moon. The moon goes out away from the sun, takes a whole month for it to go all the way to full and back. Each time it does that, it comes back to the sun 30 degrees later. So each time is a new moon in another sign of the zodiac, which is always really interesting. We just had a new moon in Aquarius. Is that true? Yes, I think we just had a new moon in Aquarius. So then we'll have a full moon in Leo. I think we had that already. and so on around the cycle. So then the 8 phases of the moon, this is thanks to the work of Demetra George, that I've been working with this for a long time. The 8 phases of the moon are laid down or overlaying on the solar year, so that we get our what we call our goddess holidays, winter solstice, Candlemas or Imbolc, spring equinox. The gibbous moon is equated with Beltane. This is all northern hemisphere, of course. It's backwards. It's the other way. It's a mirror image in the southern hemisphere. So then the full moon equals the summer solstice, the disseminating moon. Now we're starting to the waning cycle. So we have Lammas or Lugnasa, August Eve. Then we have the last quarter moon and we have the fall equinox. They're same. They're like Chinese boxes, and then we have the balsamic or the dying moon, and we have Hallowmas at the end of the year. And then we begin again with winter solstice, and we, even if you never heard of this calendar, you are affected by it. We all live inside of this structure, even though in the West it's denied. And it's as if we don't, we dominate nature rather than experiencing ourselves as part of it in Western culture. So I feel this is my Western version, I guess, of rematriation. We just have to get grounded again in the earth-based reality that we live here and we are animals. And if we're putting all the animals in the world on the point of extinction, it's very curious that we don't understand in some collective way that that includes us and that our lives are at stake. And so for me, the answer is matriarchy. We got to get back to a matriarchal beginning. And of course, Indigenous women have always known that, but we're just waking up to it in Western culture, but that's okay. I feel like we were born for this. I feel like this is the moment, it's like a command performance. We all have to be here. There's 8 billion people on this planet, and there's a reason for that. It's a karmic moment, and we have to make choices. So all of that is sort of theoretical, but I think it's pretty grounded in reality. Here's Monica Shu, beautiful painting about menstruation. She was so good at synthesizing all the different images from Africa and from old Europe and putting it all together and loving the goddess. And on the right is Mariela de la Paz, a beautiful painting. She was a young Chilean woman when I met her in Chile in the late 80s. And this is a gift that she gave me. It was the moon card in a deck of tarot cards that she was painting at the time that were from her initiation into the Mapuche tradition in southern Chile. I think it's so beautiful, and it's just one of many women's artistic expressions that began to happen with second wave feminism. And a lot of artists were making art that links back to these ancient realities without even knowing that history and that prehistory. And so I feel like this 50 years that I've been doing this work, a lot has developed in terms of our knowledge and our grounded understanding and our really coming back, to origins and to matriarchal understanding. If we can only somehow get it across, right? So that's my mission.
Thank you so much, Vicki. That was absolutely wonderful. I just
Thank
wanted
you.
to pop out and remind everyone, if you have any questions or comments, you can go ahead and enter those into the chat. And I'm going to just turn the mic over to Pat. Welcome, Pat.
Oh, can I just say one more thing that I said last time, and I want to say it again? Having done this research for 50 years, I've longed for an integration, a meeting of the minds of us Western feminist goddess women with Indigenous women who live these realities. And so in the last few years, through the gift economy and through our contact, especially with Pat and Sherri, I feel so grateful that this integration is able to happen finally. Yeah, it's like that for me.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are coming here from all over. Thank you so much. So I'm really wishing Sherri was next because there's so much was going through my mind and heart and body receiving all of your beautiful information there. But I'm going to give it a shot. So in some ways I feel like I'm responding, but I'll be bringing in the things that I meant to say here today as well. I just noticed myself resisting a little bit the anthropological way. Well, I mean, for good reasons, right? Because of the history between anthropology, anthropologists, and that study, and cultures, different cultures, has not always gone well and has not always been respectful. So I'll just name that up front, that the part of me is like, and really fantastic information there. So thank you. And so I really dropped in and I was really listening. And I think for me, you said you had this phrase, and it was when you were talking about the 8-point calendar and the 8-point cycle, which I just found that fascinating because that's how our female ceremony house is. It's 8-sided, right? So it has eight points as well. So that's an amazing thing to me. But when you were talking about that, you said we all live inside of this structure, and you also had the picture of the mandala, the multi-layered mandala. And I think today, the way this information was striking me, it was reminding me of this idea that we, as human beings, I'm trying to, it came up in quantum physics with David Bohm. And basically in his book, The Implicate Order. But he was kind of pointing to, and there was also a Japanese philosopher who I'm not going to remember their name, who pointed out that, basically the map is not the reality. And so I try to keep that in mind. And so what that means to me is that I guess one way it was described to me is there is so much going on that is beyond the human being's ability to perceive. I mean, for some of us, that seems like super obvious. For others of us, that's a stretch to consider that there's something that we cannot know. In Indigenous cultures, there's generally some reference to a concept of the great mystery, meaning we're not going to know it. And I have said before that, if you go into your science believing you can know everything, you come out with a very different result than when you go into your science knowing that there's no way you can know everything. And so, but one of the ways something was described to me that I think about is, so there's so much phenomenon going on. There's so many different kinds of cause and effects. And then we can even talk about different dimensions. We can talk about different spiritual, we talk about different energies, and even the light spectrum. That's one place where maybe we can grok that if we're more on the scientific end of the spectrum, is to say the human being can only perceive certain parts of the light spectrum or even the sound spectrum, right? And then there's parts that are beyond us. And actually some of us might have more and less, but we're kind of in a pretty good, you know, within a similar range as human beings. But then we have this understanding that there are different insects or even animals, cats, you know, they have different capacities to perceive different parts of the spectrums. And so in that way, you know, the way it was described to me is that there's so much going on that for the human being and for our nervous system, we have to have a kind of filter. And this filter, I think, is primarily the intellect. And so we have to have a way of making sense of what we perceive. And so we take this like wild cosmos, this wild multiverse, this wild interplay between light and sound and energies and ancestors and time, and we have to, we would just like kind of go crazy if we didn't have a certain way of ordering that within ourselves. And so we order it. And that's what David Vaughan was referring to. He called it the implicate order, right? And yeah, so I guess I'll just take the moment to say, the way we perceive and order things is not necessarily the reality of what's going on, but it is a way of, you know, keeping ourselves intact, keeping our nervous system intact, keeping our way of moving through time and space and embodied, while also having this sense of, what do my emotions do? What does my spirit do? What does my heart, you know, do? And knowing that we encounter at different times, different things bring about different capacities, expand our capacities to perceive more and more and more of reality. So for some reason that really came up as you were talking, Vicki, because that scientific way of trying to lock it in, and it was really that language, we all live inside of this structure that was created up here and through our perception and through our interpretation over long periods of time. So I'm not really meaning to try to unhorse you there or anything like that. It's just thinking about that way of looking at this information came up for me. And by the time I'm done, hopefully you'll understand why I'm also saying that. Because I have some really new thoughts come as you were speaking. So I wanted to start too by noticing. So you said, you know, these are ideas that we want to get across, that rematriation, matrilineal way. My daughter likes to use the word matrifocal. Like, this is the thing. How do we get this across, right? And so I wanted to speak to that just a little bit. So I often speak of the power over paradigm, and I always use this gesture, where all of the fruits of the labor travel to the top. And in here, we have this idea, well, there's certain truth in our day-to-day lives, that the further you can get up in this pyramid, the better off you are, the less danger you're in of losing your life or not having food, clothing, shelter, etc., right? And so I say, you know, in the power over paradigm, which has become a dominant human superimposed structure upon Mother Earth, which is partly why we're talking about rematriation today, is saying, wait a minute, this is not life affirming. This is not life affirming, right? But I want to point out that in that, because we get indoctrinated so deeply into that power over paradigm, we always have our eye on power. Who's got the power? And anytime there is a shift in power, and probably we're feeling it right now in all over the world, but in particular in what we call the superimposed nation state upon indigenous continent that we call the United States. You know, the power system is fluctuating kind of wildly right now. But what I want to point out that every time we pull out any one particular part of the human family, and I'll use Black Lives Matter as an example. So when we say Black Lives Matter, because we're pointing to a certain phenomenon that happens with this particular group of people, and in particular in this particular structure, right? So we're trying to say something is happening to this particular group of people in here. And there's a call for us to pay attention to it. So this is similar to talking about matrilineality, right? But what happens as soon as we do that? So immediately what came up to me at Black Lives Matter is, well, all lives matter, don't they? They all matter. Why are you doing that? You know? And so this is a big part of what I feel like we're up against as we try to talk about the life-giving principle of rematriation. So we pull out one part, and what happens is people say, well, wait a minute, if you're going to talk about the foundational principles of the feminine as being, you know, the primary focus of everything, where does that leave me? Like, I'm already struggling in here, because this is like, nobody actually wins in here, not even the people at the very, very top. Because once everything gets really up to the top, and we're sort of witnessing that right now, all the life disappears. So there's really no winners in this structure, right? And yet, so people are struggling in here. And so, you know, that impulse is to say, well, if you're going to talk about the feminine, if you're going to talk about the matriarchs, if you're going to talk, you know, where does that leave everybody else? Like, I think that feels like you're taking power away from me. That feels like you're leaving me out, or, you know, I'm going to drop down a few pegs in here if the women get to move up here. So this is what we're seeing with even DEI, right? The whole DEI question, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Oh my gosh, that's going to that seems to give somebody an unfair amount of power, is how some people feel about that, right? So I just want us to notice the milieu in which we're having this conversation, because it's important. And so it's really hard to speak to this in a way where the medicine of it can actually be taken on by the population, as you point out, the human population, to be able to begin to turn back towards placing life at the center. So I wanted to notice that. And then the other thing that came up, similar to looking at the context in which we're having this conversation, is this idea of retrieval. So you're going back, what you were describing is going back into, I mean, as you say, it kept going back a decade or a century, another or a decade. You know, we keep going farther and farther back in time to figure out what was happening when. So as far as that goes, I feel like, you know, this idea, this indigenous accounting for history, sorry, I just had a bunch of tea and a big almond croissant. I just got off the plane. But this accounting for history from indigenous perspective is very, very long. It's really, really long. And so we say we've lost worlds. Like, we lost a world to the Great Flood. We've lost worlds. And so that accounting for time, I was just wondering about this. Like, when we look at the archaeology of the kinds of things that you were showing, is it possible that at some point there were other worlds here on Earth that got wiped out, in which there's just really no evidence? And in some spiritual practices, they say that at this time, archaeological things are going to like rise up out of the earth, or even with the ice melting, they're starting to find these things. But we may begin to find some surprising archaeology that is not within this story of the archaeology that we know right now, because the human history on Earth by many indigenous people's accounting is super, super long, hundreds of thousands of years, right? So I want to name that, but I want to go to this idea of retrieval. So, you know, I sometimes talk about the great interruption that took place with this superimposed nation state being superimposed upon indigenous societies here on this continent that I'm on, known as North America or the Americas. Some call it Turtle Island. And anyway, there's a lot of different names for this place. There again, going back into all the different stories and understanding and lives lived in history, right? But what I notice about retrieval is, so for us, you know, as our cultures were interrupted, as our spiritual life became illegal, it did not become legal until, what was it, 1978 to practice indigenous spirituality. As the attempted genocides happened, you know, our cultures, some of what we held was lost. Some of it we were able to hold on to. And so what I find currently is, because we are obsessed, it's kind of a strong word, but I feel like we have, and rightly so, we have an obsession with understanding who we were before. And we really want to know, how did we used to do it? And so that seems valid, that seems natural, that seems like, yeah, you would want to know. And we have a grieving and a mourning for what was lost. But what also happens with that is people will say, well, my grandma says we used to do it like that. And then someone else says, oh, well, my uncle says we used to do it like this. This is the real way. This is the real way. So what I notice happening is a sort of dogma arising that that makes things difficult. It's hard to create the unity. You would think that, you know, retrieving culture would be a unifying thing, but it oftentimes isn't. And also what it does is it wants to make things static. So we say, once we come to a decision that this was the way we used to do it, we don't ever want that to change again. It must be done like this every time, and that must never change. Well, there's very little on this earth that behaves that way. In fact, I don't really know of much. I mean, you were talking about bone. Maybe bone lasts a long time, but it's still changing. It's still breaking down over time. So I'm just noticing that there's somebody, I think, got their speaker on or something. If you could mute yourself, that would be helpful to me. So I'm just thinking about what happens when we go into retrieval mode, the psychology that happens around that. So those were a couple things that I wanted to add to our mix to kind of hold this conversation. Then I wanted to go to, that was such a big statement. Menstrual cycles made us human. So there again, I'm going to say that that's a little bit flipped. That's the human attempt to conceptualize a phenomenon that I don't know that we fully understand yet. And so we're working with it. But I really appreciated that, because I'm going to say that, you know, in my experience, so it's a very interesting phenomenon. It's beyond interesting. It's a powerful phenomenon that when women live together, they begin to cycle at the same time. Like, what is that? That's not nothing. That's a big deal that happens. So there's something very powerful about that. And I feel like that's what, Vicki, a lot of your work is pointing to, is like, look, people notice that this is important. And what I know about Moon Lodge ceremony, putting the women who are menstruating together and giving them that space. And it often helps to also tell them, you know, anytime a human being is spilling blood, they're close to the spirit world. This is the dismantling of the holy altar of life. And so that material is holy and sacred. And when we give that back to the mother, that's a very, very high offering on behalf of our part of the sacred hoop of life, on behalf of the five-fingered ones, on behalf of our part of biology, maybe you want to say. And so when we make that offering, that's really making a profound relationship to this Mother Earth. And And at the same time, when that cervix opens, we are able to receive from this Mother Earth in a very profound way. We are able to receive direct instruction from the Mother Earth at that time. And it's not just on behalf, it can be for that woman's life, it can be for her family, it can be for her very personal circumstances, but it can also be, and often is, on behalf of the whole community and on behalf of humanity, right? So a lot of vision comes through, a lot of information, a lot of guidance and direction comes from that source, and also really linking it to that part of Earth, although it can also link you to the whole of Earth. And I was thinking about this feminine principle. So oftentimes we'll say the feminine principle is the receptacle of receiving. We, again, here's our trying to put it all together in our conceptual way. But we say that maybe we can say the feminine is about receiving. And so I wrote down here, the way of receiving the guidance is a feminine action. It doesn't mean that it's only women, but it's a feminine action. And I will say that women, or people who menstruate, have a very particular way and powerful way of receiving. And so the way of moving as human being through guidance versus the way of moving as human being through genius and brilliant idea and writing the PhD and coming up with the best idea that wins the prize. That's all very human driven. It's all coming, again, out of here in this one container among who knows how many beings there are. There's the material world beings, and then there's the spirit world beings, and then there's the celestial beings. And so we're like trying to make moves based on just this right here. Whereas if we are engaged in that feminine action of the receiving the guidance from Earth, from all the rest of the life, from the spiritual community, from the cosmos, and also from deep, deep in the interior of the human being that we don't always engage in everyday life, to receive that guidance and then make your move based upon what is heard, that's a really different way of moving. And I would call that a feminine way of moving. So when you talked about that, menstrual cycles made us human, I guess another way I might say that is to work with the menstrual cycle in that way, like I'm describing, puts us in a position to be, and here's my word I'm so thrilled with, a very Latin word. It puts us in a position to be omnibeneficent, to be a benefit and blessing to all, like every other one of our relatives that we are surrounded by. The way they conduct their lives, the way this beautiful, holy blueberry has come to conduct its life, blesses every other being around it, right? And so this is what we're learning how to be. And so to align with the way of guidance, a very feminine principle of receiving and also of community, puts us in a place to actually be a benefit and a propagator, I guess, if you will, of life versus a destroyer, right? So that's something that came up. Let's see, there was, check my time. Okay, a little more time. Oh, and so to that end, I was, the way the display figures is how you describe them. So these are the figurines that we find everywhere, all over the world, where the feminine figure is showing off the vulva, showing off, like, here's where the good stuff comes from, And so I'm going to say, yes, the menstrual blood, yes, the babies, but let's think about this too. So to be that gateway between heaven and earth, the woman, the female of our kind, is entrusted with that. That's a big deal. That's acknowledged in most every indigenous culture I know, who has not, I mean, this is becoming tainted, I guess I'll say. I want to say corrupted, but I'll just say tainted, with the way that patriarchy has moved into Indigenous cultures. But I still find that there is so much more ease in an Indigenous ceremonial setting to be able to say the woman is the life bringer, the woman is at the center, because there's not as deep a wounding here with this. And so to be able to say, you know, this is a sacred exhibition, if you will, this display figures. But what I was thinking about is, so the visions also come from there in Moontime ceremony. So we can say, this is where the information that tells us how to live in a way that will benefit and bless all life, that information is coming from here. But I also was thinking when I saw that figure, that in a woman's sensuality, I like to use that word before sexuality, man, under the right circumstances, and this is a biological capacity of the female of our kind, somebody with a clitoris, let's say, to be able to have multiple orgasm, right? I mean, you know, in this power over paradigm in which sensuality and sexuality also can become power play, there have been times when I've just been like, come on, guys, face it. I could have 10 lovers in a row and not get wore out. You're never going to beat me down sexually. You're not made for it. I, on the other hand, can technically, I mean, I don't know that my heart would stand for that, but biologically, I can go all day. I can go all week, right? But what I want to say there is that under the right circumstances, and usually that has to do with a lot of trust, a lot of care, a lot of love between the partners, and to bring a woman to multiple orgasm is another way of retrieving information from other dimensions, from off planet. I mean, we can travel. So when I saw that, that image of the display figure, and she's like, yeah, I'm talking about this is the gateway. This is the gateway where we receive, again, that feminine principle to be able to understand our lives, to be able to understand how to be a human presence on this planet that is life affirming. And I guess I'll finish here by saying, so this was really new for me, that was coming up while you were speaking, Vicki. So this kind of relates to that whole retrieval place where we're like, man, the feminine is just getting edged out by everything and we're all suffering for it. And let's look back here. Look what was going on back here in time. We had different understanding. We had different things going on. Although I don't know that we're interpreting everything that we're seeing. We're seeing it through a lens in current time, but I'm not sure we totally understand what was going on back there by looking at it now. But there's this retrieval place. But I'm wondering if the movement at the moment is now not, we know we don't want the masculine, and I'll even go so far as to say the male version that this paradigm produces. And in ceremony, the spirit said to me, you think you know what masculine is, but you don't. You think you know what feminine is, but you don't. All you know is how those two energetics behave in the power over paradigm. But if you were to plug them into a different paradigm, they would behave in a completely different way. So, man, when they said that opened the field up hugely, right? And so I say, okay, so I think for me, I'll say that when I hear the word patriarchy, that's what I think of. It's the way the masculine energy plays out in the power over paradigm. But that does not mean it is the masculine energy. That does not mean that's who men are. So my question is, well, then who the heck are these guys? Who are these men? These amazing creatures. And I want to know who they are outside of this paradigm. I really do. And I wonder if not only going back to say, look at the honoring, the prevalence of the way we see that figure of the feminine in the past, therefore we want to bring it forward, and we do. I'm not saying we don't, but I feel like there is I don't know if it's new, I don't know if we've never had it, but I don't think we've seen it on this earth for a really long time. But I think there's also the bringing in of the sacred masculine, which I think we know very, very little about. We haven't seen it for a long time. I don't know where the archaeological evidence is of it, but I was thinking about that as you were speaking, Vicki, and I think I should probably call it time over here now. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Sherri. Ball's in your court.
Thank you so much. Let's just, everybody, take a moment to slow down our vehicle from this fast-moving ride we've been on with Pat, and just bring ourselves into a slow, gentle stop here for a moment. Take a breath and take all that in. Thank you both, Vicki and Pat. I do want to just start out by thanking Jen and Letecia for bringing us together. Letecia, for your incredible skill at herding cats. I just always marvel at your ability to be able to do that with such grace, and patience, and interwoven wisdom. So thank you for holding that space for us. And Jen, thank you for opening this space for us and holding it open for us to come together in these ways, to have these really important conversations. And I'm very thankful to be able to be part of this. So to just start out, I want to say Kwe Pasiduin. Hello, everyone. Guanude, welcome. And Deliwisi wana hamu gwasita na geo banawabskewi. And Dilabamaka wasus no banawabskewi naga kakagus no tibaik. My name and my language wana hamu gwasit. My family is Bear Clan from the Penobscot Nation and Crow Clan from the Passamaquoddy tribe of Tibaik. And I do have one renegade grandmother who was Scottish, and who our research tells us her family came from the Outer Hebrides. Works out, we're clans people all the way around. So there's not real conflict for us in that. I wanted to just kind of talk a little bit about the theme that was presented to us, which was for us to think about rematriating our societies. What does that mean? And so, we have our own ideas of what rematriation means. I think that's true for a lot of people. There are a lot of shared ideas, but there are also a lot of variations in what that means. And so I was looking a while back, I was doing something else in relation to rematriation. I was looking for matriate. What does the word matriate mean in this language that we're using? And there is no word in the dictionary, matriate. There is, however, a word patriate. And what that talks about when you think about repatriating is taking a land that has been colonized and returning it to the autonomous rule of the nation itself. So it goes back to the original peoples of that land. And there's this assumption of masculine rule embedded in that thinking. So This kind of speaks to what Vicki and Pat have both talked about, which is the removal of the feminine, the removal of the sacred mother from the center of our societies. And so when I think about this notion of rematriation, it's putting the mother back into motherland and renewing our matricultural lens, helping to rebuild our awareness of what does it look like to live in a way that has matricultural and matrifocal values at the center, an ethic that allows for the continuation of the family unit, that allows for a strengthening of the entire community, knowing that when all are well within the community, we're stronger. And so when we think about, these matriarchal values and what are matriarchal, matricultural, matrifocal values, relationality is at the center of that. And mutual care, collaboration, cooperation, deep kinship with the natural world, with the living world. I don't like to say natural worlds. It's hard to get away from that word, but with the living world around us, the wild living world around us that we are a part of. And I just want to take a moment to think about this in terms of society. So if we want to rematriate our societies, we have to really be aware of what is this absence of the mother mean? What does it mean for all of us as citizens of societies across the world? And so when we think about what happens when the mother is absent, the child oftentimes has a difficulty or inability to form healthy attachments that results in distorted relationships that can go on for the rest of their lives if that breaking of that attachment to the mother is not healed. It's a hot topic right now, attachment theory across the globe. People are making a lot of money on that one right now. And so it's become a hot commodity. But what does that mean for us as societies to recognize that the entire population, other than those who have grown up in a somewhat isolated, matriarchal, matricultural societies, that the rest of the developed world, if you will, has been formed in ways that create distortions within our basic capacity to be able to be in relationship with one another. That shredding away of that deep connection to the mother is akin to a baby being torn from its mother's umbilical. That we have had that same type of severing as societies, with the loss of the mother. It also creates this increased anxiety, depression, panic, fear. There's this underlying hum of fear that exists in children who have been torn from their mothers, and who have been denied connection to mother love. I know this because this has been my experience, and it's taken me 50 plus years of work to heal that. Oftentimes there's severe PTSD connected to that type of severing, the breach. A difficulty with emotional regulation, inability to form a healthy sense of self. These are all things that we all know. And if we don't, we can watch a YouTube video or one of the little millions of little ads that pop up on your social media. Delays in cognition, right? And behavioral development. It causes all of these problems in the children that are being raised up in this in this environment. So with the millennia's long oppression, suppression, and removal of women from our societies, we see how we have developed in ways that are manifest of these kinds of problems. And that trauma has been passed from generation to generation and normalized and created into these kind of sacrosanct traditions that we honor and hold on to, that we cannot eliminate because this is what happened in the past, and we're tied to that happening in the past, that survival of those who came before us. And so we have all of these multiple layers of attachment to the imbalance rather than an attachment to a healthy mothering aspect. So the removal of that mothering aspect has caused our societies to grow up in distorted and unhealthy and imbalanced ways. There are a lot of parallels for this within the society. I think we also see what happens for the mother in those situations. Is there's a lot of grief and there's a lot of guilt. And so when you're a mother who has a lot of grief and a lot of guilt, you tend to parent in permissive ways that lack boundaries. You fail to teach your children the hard lessons of failure because you never want them to suffer anything, so you do everything for them. We become incredibly dependent upon this notion of permissive parenting that has been provided to us by these colonial structures, where we are dependent on what they offer us. We've forgotten how to do things for ourselves. We've failed to grow and to become strong individually and autonomously away from those systems. And so that unhealthy balance that is connected to all of this stuff has all of these far-reaching implications on the society. And so is it any wonder that we're in the place that we're in right now? And how do we move back to a more values-based learning, more valued-centered way of being in relation to one another in the midst of ongoing, mechanized, technocratic forces that choose to separate us from those natural law systems, you know? And so when we're thinking about all of the things that Vicki and Pat both talked about, I think that we have this really deep understanding of how we arrived where we arrived at. And as Pat said, you know, what does healthy masculinity look like? We don't know. We haven't seen it. And so, you know, thinking about that space of creation, you know, I know that this is being recorded, so I won't show you, but if it was just us friends hanging out, I would stand up and rip my shirt up and show you this huge tattoo that I have on my belly that holds that creative center with the sacred feminine, right? That space where our womb is, that there is this container for our creativity that lives in that space within our bodies. And the importance of that container for our creativity being located in that area of our body is that it sits right below and is held in rhythm with the beating of our heart. And so that intuition, that wisdom, that guidance that Pat was talking about that comes out of that center is heart influenced. And I think that's the important piece of that, is that we have been operating on guidance that never connects to the heart. We've been operating on guidance that's disconnected from the sacred feminine. We've been operating on guidance that's disconnected from the living earth. So when we're born into this world, you know, we come out of our birth mother, and our umbilical connection is then transferred to the earth mother. And in the transference of that connection to the earth mother, we find the nourishment that sustains us for the remainder of our lives here, you know, on Nigoskikdamik, on Mother Earth. And so we have this umbilical connection that forces in positions of power are consistently trying to sever. They're consistently trying to move us away from those connections to the sacred feminine, specifically as it relates to Mother Earth as a representation of the larger matriarch. And so when we think about all of the technological and mechanized advances that are happening right now, I've been writing about this a lot, and I've been immersed. I'm having a hard time rejoining this world of spoken words because I've been immersed in this world of writing for days now, and just really going through this process of trying to understand where we are right now. You know, and we have this really big push here in the land of my mothers and grandmothers on Turtle Island, to move us further and further away from that matrifocal awareness of connection with the Earth Mother, more and more towards mechanized, technocratic ways of being in relationship with one another. And what that does is it separates us from the source of our survival, and it makes us dependent on these systems. But one of the other things that I think is interesting about this time is that it talks about how we get separated. You know, they want to upload their consciousness into machines so that they can have some kind of immortality, right? And so this notion of being one part of a thread of life that continues across time, unending, that aspect of immortality is lost on those who are disconnected from that source of life. Instead, they want to have an individualized sense of immortality, not a communal sense of immortality that we all share in connection to that. So I've been writing about that concept right now in my new book, and about how we have prophecy that talks about those who are walking with their feet and their hearts and their heads connected down through to the earth, and how that is the pathway to participate in the continuation of life. And then those who are walking with their heads physically separated from their bodies, there's petroglyphs, hundreds of thousands of year old petroglyphs that show this, where there's the little beings with their heads, a space above the bodies. They're not connected. And those beings walk right off and disappear because that individualized sense of immortality that's connected to separation is unsustainable. And it's illusory, right? We can't understand ourselves outside of connection to the rest of life. And all of the ways that we try to make sense of that, and we try to make up for what we gain by that deep connection, causes harm over time. And so we're seeing all of these systems that are now working to separate us further and further and further from those connections to the source of life, creating great harm. And, I had the incredible privilege of knowing where I come from and being connected to this spatial awareness that connects me to time in a different way, not in a linear fashion. And I feel like this benefit of being connected to all time in this spatial awareness that comes from my own cultural ways of knowing has given me access to wisdom that far exceeds my own, the wisdom of collective ages. And I think that this, this wisdom of collective ages, passed down from generation to generation, could see where we were heading. And so the elders have been telling us for a very, very long time that, reliance upon machines weakens us. It makes our eyesight weaker. It makes our hearing weaker. Our sense of smell becomes weaker. Our arms and our legs become weaker the more reliant we are. Our bodies become weaker. Our sense of taste is diminished, and we become so reliant on that flavor of artificiality that we become hungry ghosts, constantly searching for that, because we've forgotten the sweetness and the goodness of what the actual elements of creation taste like. And so when we're so disconnected from our sources of life, our sources of survival, we also become sick in our bodies. So we think about this in relation to our food. The further our foods have come from a natural source, the more toxic they become, the more damage they do to our bodies. And so this is why our current generation of elders are going to die younger than their parents did, because their bodies have been contaminated by separation. It's not just the toxicity in the food, the chemicals, all of the off-gassing from machines. They're dying from separation from that sacred source of life, which is inherently feminine. And so when we talk about rematriating, we're talking about all of that. We're talking about looking at reconnecting us in all of these different ways to the very sources of our survival, which includes reconnecting us to a sense of moral courage that allows us the strength to do the right thing in the face of real harm that's being aimed at us. It's about reconnecting to Mother Earth. It's about recognizing that the further we are divided from the source of life, the greater the loss of our empathy is. The greater the distortion is in what strength within humanity looks like. In the last blog post that I put out, I talk about how we are living in a world right now where empathy is seen as a weakness, and where kindness is viewed as a weakness, and cruelty is viewed as strength. That flipping, that distortion, is only possible when we are completely disconnected from the source of life. And so the name of my new book is called Rise Wild, because what we need to do is we need to reconnect to that sense of wildness within us. Because nothing is more frightening to those who seek to control us technologically than a wild living world. It's much easier to control us technologically if we're all dependent upon those systems. And so when I think about rematriation, I think about all of those things. I think about how do we give ourselves back to service to the very thread of life, and reconnect ourselves in every possible way to that thread of life that has carried us through time. In this spatial connection to this place, Nigwasgikdamik, to Mother Earth. And so I don't know how much time I have. I have a loss of all sense of time right now, and my mind is just like,
You dropped a bunch of wisdom on us, Sherri. If you can wrap
Yeah.
it up, that'd be great so we can have time for some questions. I mean, my preference would be that we have an entire weekend where we could just sit and have this conversation because it's incredibly rich. I mean,
I
it
have
is
space for
so deep. All right. Anyways, I'm going to let you get back to wrapping it up for a minute, and then I'll check in with our presenters and Jen before we open it up to questions. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably enough. And we'll just see where our conversation goes from there. So, yeah, thank you all for listening.
it was such a good place to end it up with this whole notion of, the further that we are away from the source of life itself, that we lack empathy and our connection to the earth, that we need to really bring it back to that original place in ourselves as humans, regardless of gender. But really, what does it mean to be a human being fully on this planet, connected to the source of life? And then our roles as females and males in the way that we actually support life itself is quite a different perspective than if we try to look at it in terms of a binary balance. It's really just being with life. So thank you so much for that. Let me check in with Vicki and Pat to see if there's any kind of response you might want to have with Sherri, and then Jen. Vicki, if you can unmute, that would be great.
Yeah. Yeah, I have so many responses. We have to have a weekend together. Both. I'm so impressed. It's so exciting, the level of thinking that we're able to do from our hearts, or the level of heart we're able to have in our thinking. And it just, you both stimulate me so much. I've spent all my teaching years telling the males who come to my audiences, there's a difference between masculinity and patriarchy, because the men always think you're talking about them when you're talking about patriarchy. And I really believe that the masculine energy is sacred. We can lift it out from patriarchy, just like we women opt out if we're able to in some ways. Anyway, there's so much more. We're just bravissima. Fantastic.
Thank you, Vicki. Pat.
Thank you. Thank you both, Vicki and Sherri. Sherri, wow. Yeah, I really appreciated this separation from life and the separation, which you called inherently feminine at one point. So that diminishment of that, and sort of the unraveling of the human being that happens, and you named some very specific things around that we're witnessing today: dysregulation of nervous system, attachment issues, and that phrase, there becomes attachment to the imbalance. That's our reference point, and this idea of what happens to the mother in those societies. So not only the young, but the mother's guilt, and I couldn't remember the second word you used, and the fact that it creates permissive parenting. And so, at one point in ceremony, I was told, the mother is the first medicine person of every member of the community. She's the one who tells them, who orients them to life and to being a human being, before all the rest of the community gets involved in imparting cultural understanding and knowledge, and before they're turned over to others for initiation. So that mother is a really important piece. So when she's all freaked out, she doesn't have the capacity to orient the child to life that way. But the other thing that I'll just add, there was so much, but I just feel like going into this just a little bit. And so I was thinking, what happens to those mothers in those societies? And then I was thinking, with other mammals, what happens is with mammals is mothers eat their young. And so I was thinking about that, and I was thinking that I think the way I might look at that for a human being is emotional incest, where the mother cannot be a leader or a guide, but instead uses the child to try to cope with the situation by making the child their marriage counselor, their everything. Like the child is shielded from nothing about the mother's interior and everything that she's trying to work with in a world out of balance. Oh, and then I just have to say, I think you were talking about AI, individualized sense of immortality by uploading consciousness into technology. That's such a powerful way to think about that, and I really appreciated that. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Pat. Jen, is there anything that you wanted to say? You need to unmute, my friend.
I just wanted to say thank you, and I've been weeping throughout the whole time that you all have been speaking. It is so moving to hear the truth spoken this way.
Thank you so much, Jen. Yes. And thank you again, I think, from all of us for creating this space for us to gather every 2 weeks. And, we really want the word to get out so that we rematriate society in the most graceful, appropriate ways that's non-invasive. So, just to get in under the wire. So with that, let me just check in with Liliana to see if there's a question. Maybe we have a little bit of time, like 20 minutes, to take a few questions before we actually close out our session today.
Yeah, I have a question from Patricia White. She says the indigenous people here say they have always been here. They reject the suggestion that they crossed the ice from somewhere else. Has anyone researched this area of history? I can repeat the question.
I don't think there's a need to repeat it. I think that's something we
Thank
probably
you.
hear all the time. And so my grandfather actually wrote a book on the land bridge theories as an anthropologist, and disputed those quite soundly. Of course, we know that, the origins of life were not all across the globe all at once, that there has been some migration. What we do know is that we have, and I just want to say that question is very patriarchal. That question is very much tied to territoriality and ownership and dismissal of indigenous realities in relationship to the land. Whether it was intended to be or not, it's a common theme that indigenous people hear all the time. It's an offhand dismissal of our connection to place. What we do know is that from where I am in Chquabenaquiec, we have scientific knowledge that you would be able to look at and recognize as valid that dates us here 15,000 years ago in this place. And so our ancestors, the red paint people, who were in this place for a very, very long time, who people have tried to separate us from that ancestry, even though there's no separation from our people on this land in that entire time, gives us a sense of relationship with this place that's different than somebody who has lived on land for 100 years or 50 years or 200 years. That relationship across deep time is very, very different. And so recognizing that we have relationship to place across deep time, I think gives us a sense of connection to something that has been lost by a lot of European cultures. And I also think that there are indigenous and Aboriginal peoples in the world who have connection to place that they can date 65,000 years. And so all the way back through to the beginning of the memory of our peoples, we have been in relationship with this place. And so I'm sure that Pat probably has something to add to this statement, that, you know, I think it's a distraction from the conversation that we're having right now. But Pat, if you want to give it a minute, I think.
Yeah, it does feel a little tangential, but I'll just note that there's all kinds of, it's never just black and white, right? So like for my people, we have an origin in what we call our, within the 4 sacred mountains. And then we also have a migration. So our creatrix actually did end up in the Pacific Northwest and sent the first human beings that she created back to the origin in the 4 sacred mountains. And so there's this linguistic trail that comes from the Pacific Northwest down through Canada, Washington. And I'll just say my clan grandfather said that we in some ways are a conglomerate culture because we spent time with a lot of different peoples coming back to our original origin place. And so we picked up a lot of different things from different cultures on the way down. So then there's that. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Yes, I think part of what we want to recognize in this conversation about rematriating society is that the lens in which anthropology has been honed is from a Eurocentric point of view. So a lot of the main stories that we're told about the history of this continent are from the lens of Europeans. And what we have today is this opportunity, graced with these 2 elders who have lived within their cultures, both struggling to maintain their original stories and also to reclaim the artifacts and knowledge that was stolen. And so I think that's what is unique about today in terms of rematriating, because it's giving us an opportunity and I think an invitation to flex our minds and reorient our perception of how we see who we are as settlers on a land that our ancestors did not come from. So I want to thank you for that question, because it really does actually frame us right in the place of wanting to rematriate to the laws of this land. And maybe you want to also rematriate to the laws of your ancestry. Those are 2 very distinct and not necessarily unrelated things. But thank you for that question. Okay, Judith, I see that there are a couple of other questions in the Q&A. Can you actually reference those questions?
Okay, give me a minute if you want me to look at the Q&A. I've been checking the chat.
Oh, do you have one from the chat?
Sophia talks about the concept of, or mentions the concept of hungry ghosts, and I wonder if that's a concept that you accept, and if you could comment on how hungry ghosts fits into the question of rematriation.
Okay, I think hungry ghost is a Buddhist term. So I don't know if Sherri or Pat, do you have any comments? Vicki, you might be better.
I think it's because I mentioned it in my comments.
Okay, go ahead, Sherri, please.
I mean, I was referring to this reality that everything is so artificially emphasized and amplified that we don't know how to be with what is anymore. We need that extra amplification. We need the brighter colors all the time. We need the high density flavor saturation that comes with artificiality. We need to feel things to the extreme in a sensationalized way in order to feel like we're living. And the absence of that, because of our addiction to it, we have actually become addicted to artificiality. And that addiction to artificiality is what causes that hungry ghost essence within our society, because we don't know how to just be in a living world that provides us with everything that we really need, when we're operating from a balanced place. And so it's that conditioning, right, that creates that hungry ghost essence, and that addiction to this artificial, virtual reality is what it really is. It's like something that you can, a virtual reality that you can feel. It's like smell-o-vision, taste-o-vision, that we are having food that's so enhanced by false colors and false flavors that we don't know what real food tastes like anymore. So, I think that's so with almost every aspect of our lives, bringing young people out here to just sit with us on the land and be quiet. You'd think that you were burning them with a hot steak. It's just so painful for them to just sit still on the land and be quiet without devices. Because there's that early indoctrination into the addiction of that virtual reality that helps to escape from what we've done to the world and the world that we're living in. This, yes, as Sophia says, a disembodiment. So, Vicki, did you want to share something as well?
Yes, I wanted to thank you, Sherri, for the language you use about the attachment and the disconnection from the source of life. I think the hungry ghost thing is a perfect metaphor for us in these times, because we're so dissociated from the actual sources and source of life, from the Mother Earth, from all of it that we've been talking about, that it's just like the food. The food is so denatured that it doesn't nourish us nutritionally. So we're just starving, and people have, the obesity thing in this country is just off the scale. And so much of it, I think, is related to the fact that there's nothing in the food anymore. It's not connected to where it came from and so on. And the same is true of all the things we've been talking about. And so we have this insatiable hunger that can't be satisfied because we've lost the spiritual connection, if you want to call it that, or the connection to reality. And we're in this virtual more and more and more in this sort of transhuman condition that they seem to want us to be in. And it's just the opposite of the nourishment and the connection that we are so longing for, so hungry for. And that's the hungry ghost. The hungry ghosts in the Tibetan version are, they're starving, and their throats are too tight for any food to actually come into their stomachs. And so they never can be satisfied. And it's like, that is consumer America, right? No satisfaction. It's impossible to be satisfied. You just get a new outfit, you want another one. You get some new food at a restaurant, you want something different. We're lost in that way because we've lost our rooted connection to what is real.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vicki. Pat, did you have something that you wanted to offer to this question?
I did. Thank you. So not only, when you were talking, Sherri, about not being able to stay still with the land, but I think also that hungry ghost, which is also the way some people, I believe Gabor Mate, describes addiction. I think it's also about not only just not being able to be with stillness, but part of the purpose of the stillness in some ways is to be able to receive that guidance that we've talked about a little bit here. So to be able to get still, to be able to receive the guidance, then to be able to act on the guidance in concert with the larger community, as I call it, all the life, the spirit world, the cosmos. That is, I think, an inherent satiation for the human being. And I think it's pointing to, you know, part of what we contribute to the sacred hoop of life, our perfect design for thriving life, has to do with being this receiver and an actor from the whole. And maybe all the forms of life do it, but we have a particular way of doing it. And so, you know, it's also hard sometimes to get the people to come to ceremony, because it does involve that part of sometimes having to listen very long times to others, but also to be in that quiet, but to be able to really feel the beauty, the magic, the engagement of having that door inside of ourselves open to the spirit world, and to the other than human, and to be able to participate in that. And I think the more we've gone up here to the intellect, which has a function, but it's not that, not what I was just describing. You know, the hungrier we get, we can't quite get it, because we're sort of ignoring huge parts of what our human capacity can engage with, I guess I'll say. Yeah.
Thanks, Pat. Jen, did you have anything that you wanted to offer at this moment? You need to unmute, my friend. You're all my friends.
Not really. I don't. I just want to listen to this whole thing all over again, which I'm going to do very soon.
I agree. I wondered, I'm looking at the time, and, you know, unfortunately or fortunately, I am the timekeeper. We have about 6 minutes left, which means that it gives us enough time for each of our speakers, including Jen, to actually just have a closing word, something that you might want to offer as last thoughts on this topic of rematriating, which is really, I think, a call to action for the maternal gift economy is to rematriate society, so that this notion of true mothering, and I'm forever grateful because, Jen, I learned a word, mother-er, which is, instead of parenting, using the term of mother-er, which actually puts at the center all of the skill of mothering, everything that is required for healthy development of a child for both males and females. So it's not a gendered orientation. It's really about a set of skills. And rematriating to me is a call to everyone to be a motherer, because there isn't a single mother who can do it on her own. We need to actually collectively support mothers. So those are my last thoughts. But Jen, do you have others?
Yeah, maybe we ought to call it the mother economy instead of the gift economy. Is what we need, and how that the capitalist economy takes from and distorts our true human economy and way of satisfying needs of all kinds, and the true human way we're supposed to be, because we're certainly distorting that in such a terrible way now that we're about to destroy the planet. And so that's it. Thank you so much for this beautiful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Vicki, are there some last words that you'd like to?
Well, the thing that I would like to come back to is how Pat, I think, yes, talked about the matriarchs, you know, and what about the rest? I like to think about oxytocin. I like to think about women governing as a group and not as individuals. You know, it's not Margaret Thatcher or Hillary Clinton. It's the whole group of mothers or women at the center who are who are generating so much oxytocin that everyone feels it. There's like a benefit, you know. When a mother's giving birth, if it all goes well, if she's in a natural process and able to do her birthing process, everybody in the room or in the space, you know, gets high. The oxytocin flows in a way that can be felt. And I have come to believe that the way matriarchal cultures have probably worked and stayed peaceful and the men stay happy has to do with the group governance of the women and the oxytocin flowing. And I'll just give one quick example. What's her name? The Tend and Befriend person. I can't remember her name right now. Shelley Taylor. There was a study that showed that a male partner of a pregnant woman, if he's living with her and loving her, that his testosterone drops by 30%, and it stays that way through the whole pregnancy and 6 weeks into the infancy. And so I've extrapolated from that to imagine that the female group creating so much oxytocin, just as a general rule, is pacifying the male testosterone tendencies toward aggression. It's taken away, and that's why matriarchal men, you know, can be the way they are. It's kind of a little bit of a model for us about how men might act when they're not warlike, when they're not aggressive, when the testosterone isn't ruling everything. So that's all. The matriarchs, it's really a group phenomenon as far as I'm concerned, and not individuals.
Thank you, Vicki. Pat, would you have some last words for our listeners?
Yeah, thank you, Vicki. So yeah, that was my question. In these functioning matriarchal, matrilineal, matrifocal societies that perhaps we're seeing evidence of, what were the men doing? That's what I want to know, because somehow they were causing that functionality as well. I feel like on some level. So I'm just very curious. Like, as you say, it's a collective. I just wanted to read out a couple phrases. I was just at a rematriation conference hosted by matriarchs from Haudenosaunee Nation, and so for the way that they, along with the Bear Clan mother and some others, decided to define rematriation, they said the act or process of returning the sacred to the mother, and also giving the child what it didn't get. And this was kind of more like post-colonization. So language, love, mother, culture, community. Talking about the matriarchal leaders in their system, and this might be the clan mothers. She leads the earth, seeds the earth. She's the mature flower, the mature star, the mature earth. Also, part of her function is maintains the honor of men, but also provides the correction with kindness. And then another characteristic I thought was really interesting that was named was that the clan mother receives correction also from other women. She's also seen as the comber, so the comber out of the tangles that are coming up in community. And then I wanted to name, what was it? Oh yeah, this came from Paulette Moore, PhD. Not just power, but empowering. So this is the matriarchal working with power. It's not to hold power, but to be empowering to the community. And then also I like this idea of it's our journey within, getting right with ourselves, coming to peace with ourselves, coming to the healing, like Sherri was talking about, that some of us have been deeply engaged in. And that's what actually brings peace to the whole and allows us to be the functioning, omnibeneficent human being. And then I guess lastly, I'll just say that I had this, I don't even know if I have words for it yet, but I kind of had this thing at the conference come through about, because so one name for rematriation is the return of land to Indigenous stewardship, AKA land back, or as my Hawaiian relatives call it, land reunion. And so I say, if I'm going to use that term land back, I'm going to call it returning the Mother Earth to herself, meaning the human being puts themselves to the side to listen for what the Mother Earth wants to do in any given place, even our traditional territories. So we don't just go right back to, this is what we used to do, and by gosh, we're gonna, I think it's a moment to really listen for her to say, okay, as an Indigenous person, I somehow got to claim this right, if you will, to be in relationship and determine how the human beings are going to have relationship with a place that this particular culture and group of people once held. But the first principle there is to ask you, Mom, what is it that you need from us now? So that's what I'm thinking about, returning her to herself, so that she can, we say that's where our language came from. I say that's where culture came from. Culture is not a human construct. Culture is the Mother Earth expressing herself as human being in any given place. Mm-hmm. So rather than taking a retrieved culture and imposing it on her in this moment, but giving her the opportunity to continue to enculturate the human being by telling us this is what is called for on the earth now. And if you want to be of service to that, that's your culture. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Pat. All right. How about you, Sherri? Last words.
Okay, I just want to be mindful of everyone's time because we are over. So I want to first express my gratitude to all of the women who have been joining us today, and to the few men who have joined us today as well, to Vicki and Pat for the wisdom that you've shared, Letecia and Jen for the way that you've held this space for us. I just want to share my gratitude. I do want to make a couple of comments. Jill Apperson had said, can we begin with mothering ourselves? Yes. We have to give to ourselves what we have not received in order to make ourselves whole. That's part of the healing process, is learning how to mother ourselves, and to bring those aspects of mothering through us out into the world. We have to first learn how to offer that to ourselves. So I think that that's a really important piece. I also wanted to just speak to, Bob made a comment about, this whole process was mediated by technology in a transhuman way. And I disagree. I think that this process was facilitated by human beings utilizing technology in a way that allows for connection between human beings, not in a transhuman way. And when we allow technology to be the decision maker, when we allow technology to be the one in control, then we are operating in a transhuman way. When we utilize technology properly as a means to allow human beings to connect with one another and to share human vision and human wisdom, that is the proper place for technology within our societies, not as the decision maker or the consciousness for the society, but as a tool that facilitates human connection across various spaces. And then I was thinking about what Pat just said about the land. We have here very strong statement. I believe I might have read it in our last time together, in our bylaws about our relationship with the land. And we view our land back and rematriation policies, our rules of engagement with the land, based on principles of kinship, and recognizing that our word and our language for sovereignty and Dibalamosul Deepin means I own myself, which doesn't mean that I'm an autonomous being, separate from the rest of life, but that I have the responsibility for managing my relationship within this ecosystem of life that I belong to, and that I am accountable for and responsible for that relationship. And recognizing the sovereignty of the land is akin to recognizing the sovereignty of women, that we acknowledge the return of land to us as a movement of taking the land out of a commodified transactional process, returning the land to its place, its status as a co-equal being with us, with the same rights that we expect for ourselves. Taking the burden of human expectation from the land for productivity and profitability. And so, you know, as we think about this process of rematriating, what are the burdens that we have placed upon ourselves in relation to salability and commodification? How do we take those burdens off from our own shoulders? How do we take the essence of commodifiable, saleable, transactional aspects out of our relationships with one another and move to something that's more relationally transformative? And I think that's really at the heart of rematriation, is creating relationally transformative realities that represent the world we most want to live in. In order for us to do that, we have to become the people who are capable of living in that world. And so that, to me, is at the heart of rematriation, is becoming the type of person who can live in and actively participate in meaningful ways in a rematriated reality. So thank you all so much.
Yes. Thank you so much, Sherri. Yes, we really are living at a time that is so critical for us to really be paying attention, most importantly, on our own personal health, because we can't actually be change makers unless we can be healthy enough to do it. And with that thought, I just want to invite you to come back next week when we have Karina Kailo from Finland, who's going to be talking about her new book called Sauna, Culture, Sweat, and Spirituality. And she has worked a lot with Barbara Alice Mann. Karina is looking at sweats and saunas, not just in her own culture, but also cross-culturally, and what it might be able to benefit each of us as we're struggling with this time. You need to actually do a reset and do a cleanse. So please do come back in a week. That will be March 15th. On March 22nd, on the same note of rematriation and supporting mothers, and we have Motherful returning for their part 2. And this is a group co-led by 2 women in this organization called Motherful, and they have 600 plus single mothers in Columbus, Ohio, that they are supporting and helping to educate, create community for each other as allo mothering, so that they know how to navigate in this time using the values and philosophy of modern matriarchal studies. One of our elders, Heidi Gutner Abendroth, and the maternal gift economy at the core of their value systems, along with all of this idea of what it means to be local. They're incredible activists. So I want to invite you back March the 22nd. I want to thank Lisa Hayes, who is in the background right now. She doesn't ever really pop out, but she is supporting our technology. I want to thank Liliana and Judith, who are attentively, scanning to make sure that when I create the opportunity for a question, that they have a question to populate our conversation. I want to really thank Vicki Noble, Pat McCabe, and Sherri Mitchell for the return of this work and for an incredible, stimulating conversation that you have started with us. And I have a fantasy and a desire that we will at some time be able to have a longer time in person, if not virtual, but that we will be able to have this conversation more deeply and extensively to maybe come out with some action items that we can do together. I know individually we do. And Genevieve Vaughan, you know, the epic history of what you have done in your lifetime to encourage us to return to this whole idea of what it means to be enabling women in women's leadership to claim our voices and our actions to truly transform this world so that we can return to a place of peace, which is what I think we all want. And with that, my friends, I want to thank you.
And a rant for this time of year. If you're not in North America, please check the time of the events that are happening during March, because it may be different if you're not in North America.
Thank you, Judith.
and
What I will go
And
ahead, Jen.
I want to thank you, Letecia, for your fabulous moderation all the times that you moderate all our groups. You do it in a beautiful way, and so thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And I want to encourage any of you who are listening still in this room today and to the recording. It's the sisterhood of these women and women like them. So I want to encourage you to gather and circle with other women and continue to celebrate International Women's Day today and Women's History Month. Thank you all so much for coming, and we will see you again in a week. Sherri, Pat, Vicki, thank you so much. Genevieve, thank you. Liliana, Judith, and Lisa. We'll see you again. Much love to you all. Peace.